Hi and welcome back to Garden Ninja. Now today's video is going to be giving you winter gardening tips for beginners. So if you're new to gardening or you've just moved house and you're looking out in the winter months at your garden thinking I don't know where to start, then this guide is for you. I'm going to take you through some key plant types and activities you can do in winter in your garden even if you don't know what you're doing. So come on, let's get cracking. If you've not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, hit the red button to subscribe today. Also click the bell for notifications. We'll have access to hundreds of garden design hints, tips and hacks from me, the Garden Ninja. And best of all, it's free. Now probably the easiest group of plants to recognise in the garden are the evergreens. And why is that? It's because they stay green all year round. So in the winter months when other plants have lost their leaves or have started to look a bit bare, evergreens, like this standard oleaster behind me, keep the leaves. Now winter is not the time to start pruning evergreens, so it's really easy for new gardeners because you can just leave them alone. If they are looking a bit out of shape, the prime time to prune evergreens is spring, when everything else has started to burst into life. So leave them for now, but make a note of any shaggy evergreen shrubs or trees that need a bit of a nip or a tuck, and then get your secateurs out in spring and do it then. So leave them alone. Now, we've talked about evergreen plants, trees and shrubs, those that keep their leaves throughout the winter, and we don't want to touch those in the winter time. However, we need to talk about deciduous plants, trees and shrubs. Now, these are plants that lose their leaves in the winter. They go dormant, so they usually reserve all of their energy, slow down, drop their leaves, and then they're dormant throughout the winter. And the winter time is a prime time to prune them and to get them back into shape. So if you're a new gardener or you've got a new garden and you're noticing things a bit like this tree, this carpinus behind me, that's lost its leaves and they need a bit of a tweak or a reshape, now is the time to do it. And the best way to do that is with a sharp pair of secateurs. And whenever you're making pruning cuts, make sure you're cutting just above either a node or a lateral. And a lateral are easy to spot because they go out sideways. So you've got a stem and then a lateral. And if you're going to make a cut, you're going to cut just above that lateral. But I'll show you on a close-up. So I'm going to show you that on this deciduous hazel here, which is a multi-stem shrub. Now this is the stem, that's the lateral I'm talking about. So if we want to remove this bit of growth here, you always want to cut it just above a lateral. Now it's also got some buds about to break here in here, and I can prune above those too. So if I don't want to go as far back as here, let's say I just need to nip the end off because it's getting too long, then I would prune it here, and I'll show you that now. So just above this bud, always at an angle away from the bud. There we go, nice neat pruning cut. So winter is the prime time to do this, and you can do this for things like hedges, shrubs and trees to help get them back into a decent shape. Now, one group of plants that you can prune back in the winter are herbaceous perennials. Now, herbaceous perennial is any plant that comes back year after year but has a dormancy period in the winter. And you can spot them really easily because what they tend to do is crisp up and go all brown in the winter, like this salvia behind me. So if you look out into your garden, and even if you don't know what's out there, if it's gone brown over the winter time and it's come up year after year, then you can prune it back in winter. And the benefit of doing that with a sharp pair of secateurs is that it helps remove all the congestion ready for this year's growth. If I just leave this salvia there, it will grow back again this year, but all this dead material is going to get congested. It's going to underperform and look a real mess. So I'm going to take my secateurs and cut it back to about 2 inches above the ground. And it may feel brutal, but that is dead growth anyway, so it needs to go. And it's super easy to do with a sharp pair of secateurs. I just get in there, snip all of that back. You can even grab big bunches of it and just snip, snip, snip. And you'll hear it crack, so you know that it's dead material and it needs to come off. Now, if you're wondering what to do with all this cut back matter, don't just put it in the bin, you can recycle it. If you've got a compost heap, you can put that on there. If you've got bug hotels, you can stuff it in to help provide a bit of warmth and security for beneficial insects. So the whole thing about gardening is trying to reduce, reuse and recycle. And when you're cutting back things like herbaceous perennials, make sure you compost them as best you can. Here is a really good example of a herbaceous perennial versus an evergreen. On the left here you'll see this is a Pachysandra, it's an evergreen creeping plant. You can usually tell an evergreen because they usually, but not always, have almost a glossy or sort of thicker leaf. You can tell that they're just a bit more robust, they can cope with frost. This here is an Alchemilla mollis, lady's mantle. This is not an evergreen, and you can tell because it's all brown and crispy. Now, I cut this back last autumn, but I could cut it back a bit further. So with cutting back herbaceous perennials, you can easily spot the difference between an evergreen and a herbaceous perennial. And just like we did around there, we're just going to cut this back to help uncover some of this year's growth when it starts in spring. Now, if you're a beginner gardener, the chances are you'll have been out to the garden centre last year and bought bedding plants. And these are called annuals, so they only last for a season. But unfortunately, the garden centres don't always tell you that. So if you've got bedding plants, they're not going to come back this year. Bedding plants are fantastic for a pop of summer colour, but they don't come back year after year. So they can be kind of expensive, and also a lot of them are sterile, meaning that they don't produce pollen. So although you see flies and bees hovering around them, there's nothing in them to actually sustain them. So if you've got bedding plants like this in a container, when it comes to the end of the year, you're just going to have to lift them, but compost them, so you can still recycle them, but you're going to have to replace them year after year. And it's just worthwhile bearing that in mind, because there may be better plants such as herbaceous perennials or other ways to get bedding plants, such as growing them from seed rather than buying them from garden centres. They've got really big carbon footprints. Now, lawns are always a hot topic for beginner gardeners. The old advice used to be not to touch your lawns in the winter, and that was because we used to have really severe winters here in the UK where the ground would freeze, and if you're going to start mowing or scarifying, you're just going to damage the grass and the soil. However, probably due to global warming, we're having really mild winters. So if you're in January or early Feb and the weather is nice enough, it's not frozen and the ground isn't waterlogged, you can edge and mow your lawns, but just make sure to leave it quite long. You don't want to do a short cut. But if you've moved into a property and the lawn's gotten quite long, you can give it a quick trim, providing it's not frozen and not waterlogged. But if it is, just wait until early spring. Now, another top tip is to start weeding in the garden in winter. Now, you may be asking, well, Garden Ninja, if I don't know what's in my garden, how can I possibly weed it? And the answer is simple. You can start to weed out those perennial weeds that are easily identifiable. We're talking about things like thistles, docks, dandelions, the weeds that come back year after year. So although you can't weed all of the garden, it's worthwhile getting out with either a kitchen knife or a small trowel and weeding out any of those really obvious to identify weeds. And I've got a whopper in the bed behind me, and I'm going to show you how I weed now, just to give you a head start in getting rid of those pesky weeds. It's not meant to be there, I didn't plant it, and I don't want it, so it's a weed. Now, I tend to use a hori, which is a Japanese gardening knife. You can use a kitchen knife, you can use a trowel. What you want to do is get into the very base, and I tend to wiggle around. I can feel the root there, it's massive. Right, and look at that. That was a big one. Here's another example nearby of another weed. You can see it here, evergreen. I'm going to pop that out. There we go. Now you may have noticed that although I've weeded and cut back everything, all of my ornamental grasses are still standing, and I tend to leave these until the middle of February here in the UK. And the reason for that is I really like the beautiful russet tones that they give, and they give structure to the garden. If you can imagine this bed without the grasses, it's going to look really bare and flat. So I leave these until mid-February. When the time is right, using a pair of sharp secateurs, I will cut these down to about 1 inch or 2 above the ground, just the same as the herbaceous perennials. Now that you've tidied up your garden, you've spotted your evergreens from your deciduous, you've pruned back your herbaceous perennials and also done a bit of weeding, it's time to plan for the future. And winter is a fantastic time to get out all of those seed catalogues for things that you might want to grow yourself in a greenhouse or on a window ledge, or start planning buying herbaceous perennials, trees and shrubs ready for this year. And it's really worthwhile sitting down uninterrupted for a good hour or so and working out what plants you want to go where. And it's important to make a note of the aspect, as in where does the sun rise and fall, your soil type and what kind of look you're going for in the garden. And I can promise you that if you spend a couple of hours really considering the type of plants, feel and colour that you want in the garden, you'll make much wiser purchasing decisions, you'll waste less money and you'll be set up for success. Have you got gardening questions that you need answers for? Well, why not head over to the Garden Ninja forum on my blog, where you can ask me anything about gardens, plants and garden design. There's a whole army of other garden ninjas there that can help provide answers to your questions. It's a really great way to meet the other ninjas, so head over there now. So there we have it, my beginner's guide to winter garden maintenance. If you've liked this video, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button below and the bell for notifications. If you've got more questions, make sure you visit my site gardenninja.co.uk. I'm off inside for a brew. Happy gardening.